Darkness, not the kind that comes with the night, but the kind that creeps in when exhaustion presses down on the soul. Dr. Ethan Cole knew that kind of darkness well. He hadn't slept in, 20 hours? 30? He'd lost track. The hospital clock blurred, time dissolving into a never-ending cycle of emergencies. Hospitals may have schedules, but they don't run on them. They run on adrenaline, on sheer willpower. And for months, no years, Ethan had carried the survival of others like a cross on his back. A patient coding in one room, a critical surgery in the next, and endless paperwork suffocating the cracks in between. His body carried the weight of every life he'd fought to save, and yet he never let it show. Not when his residents looked up to him, not when his colleagues leaned on him, not when his patients whispered, "You're my only hope." So he bore it all, every shift, every emergency, every mistake he couldn't afford to make. And then came the night that changed everything. The ER was a battlefield. Ambulances screeched in, doors flying open, mangled bodies flooding in like an unrelenting tide. A multi-car pileup on the interstate had turned the city into a war zone. Blood, panic, sirens. The scent of antiseptic barely masked the sharp, iron-like scent of blood. Ethan didn't think. He sprang into action, a machine of instinct and precision. He moved, he cut, he stitched, he saved. One patient, gone. Nothing he could do, move on. Another barely hanging on. His hands worked faster. Then room 7. A young woman, early 30s, unconscious, massive internal bleeding. He could fix this. He had to. Scalpel, clamp, suction. His mind was sharp, but his body? Shaking. His fingers fumbled, just slightly, a tremor barely noticeable. But then the monitor screamed. A flat line! The scrub nurse gasped. A resident looked at him, wide-eyed, waiting for direction. He hesitated, just a second, a blink. That single moment, that hesitation, cost a life. They worked the code, but it was too late. And just like that, his burden became heavier. Ethan locked himself in the supply room, the fluorescent light humming above him. He braced his hands against the counter, head low, breath shallow. Weakness. That's what this was. He should have done better. Been sharper, faster, stronger. His reflection in the metal cabinet sneered back at him. A man unraveling under his own impossible standards. Then his phone buzzed. A text, simple, brutal.
Your father collapsed. ICU. Come now.
He ran. To the next hospital, to the next emergency. But this time, he wasn't the doctor. He was the son. His father, Richard Cole, had been a firefighter for 25 years. A man who never backed down, never let others carry his weight. And now he lay in a hospital bed, wires and tubes replacing his strength.
Stress-induced heart failure.
The attending doctor explained. He's been ignoring symptoms for months. Ignoring, pushing through, bearing it all alone. Ethan's stomach twisted. His father wasn't weak, but he had broken anyway. Ethan sat at his father's bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own exhaustion. Not just in his body, but in his soul. How many times had he told himself just one more shift? How many times had he ignored the trembling in his hands, the migraines, the hollow ache of too much responsibility? And for what? To prove he was unbreakable? His father had tried that, and here he was. Suddenly, Ethan saw it clearly. He wasn't holding everything together. He was falling apart. And if he kept going like this, one day he wouldn't just hesitate. He'd collapse. The next morning, Ethan did something he had never done. He looked at the schedule, found his name stacked on shift after shift, and walked into his chief's office.
I need help.
2 words felt foreign on his tongue. His chief raised an eyebrow.
Excuse me?
I can't keep doing this alone.
His voice didn't shake. It didn't sound weak.
I need help.
There was silence, then a nod. The changes weren't immediate. The burdens didn't disappear. But the weight, it became lighter, not because there was less work, but because for the first time he wasn't carrying it alone. And so, my friend, I ask you this. What weight are you carrying that you're too afraid to put down? At what point does perseverance turn into self-destruction? Because strength isn't about breaking yourself to prove a point. True strength is knowing when to share the load,